fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. We are back again talking all about tides. Got my bro, Luke Simons. Luke, when was the last time you got a haircut, my friend?
Well, usually I would say by like weeks, but now I'm really measuring in years, and so it was back in 2019, Joe.
Ooh,
still holding strong.
Not bad, dude. So June 2020. Let's see if you can make it all the way a full year.
That's the see if I can go haircut free. I don't know. I'm sure I'll get tired after a little while, but so far it's been good luck, man. I've been having a good bite, and it's just been getting better and better. So why mess up a good thing? You know?
Oh yeah, it looks like a combination of Jesus and Duck Dynasty there. So, and good news is we get to rely on you to learn all about tides. So, long story short, tides are incredibly important. These tide stations and the tide charts that we all have seen and grown up with, they're incredibly accurate most of the time. And we're going to talk about when they're accurate. There are also some times when they're completely inaccurate. And we're going to talk about why that would happen, what variables cause that to happen. And then we're going to actually get on some maps, right, Luke, and show some like real life examples of how wind and rain and fronts and pressure systems can change these tide charts, and exactly what you need to know to make sure that, one, you're fishing at a time in your area where you've got good flow, because that's going to help increase the amount of strikes that you get. We all know that, especially our favorite inshore saltwater fish, they love current. And we also want to make sure you don't ever get stuck back anywhere, whether it's a bay or back in a creek. There is nothing worse than being stuck there at many times for an hour or many, many hours. So I'm going to talk all about that. And we also helped create this site called Smart Fishing Tides. We saw a problem out there with some of just the tide websites and apps that were being used. Some of them had just so much stuff. It was like, it didn't even mean anything. We wanted something that was simple. Plus, it was really built for inshore saltwater anglers that would show you guys exactly what's going on, what you need to know with both the tides, the wind direction, and of course that strike score, which is incredibly popular. That is kind of a predictive analysis tool to show you when you should go out there and fish to maximize the times that you can catch an inshore slam. And it's eerily accurate. We've got so many testimonials of people that have, I think, what is it? It's over a 9. It's basically on a scale from 1 to 10. And if it's a 9 something, 9.1 to 9.8, it will say, actually call your boss and call in sick and go fishing today.
Yeah, and the reason, first of all, that tide tables are always accurate for the variables that they predict, which is the moon and the sun, right? Okay. Because the moon and the sun have been traveling the same speed for a very long time, and they're not going to change anytime soon. And these tide projections are using that as a core factor. What they don't measure are the more real-time stuff, like wind speed, wind direction, change of speed, change of pressure, and obviously because that changes all the time. And so those are the variables that we as fishermen need to know about and think about and know how they impact the completely accurate tide graphs. Because unless the wind is perfectly calm and the pressure is totally normal, those tide graphs are perfect. But that's rarely the case. So we need to know how that curve is going to change based on the conditions that we're facing. So,
and real quick too, if you're wondering, hey, is this for me? This is not for beginners. I mean, it obviously it applies to beginners as well, but this is going to be some advanced stuff. However, let's start on the beginner side, just to kind of cover the basics on reading a tide chart. Can you pull up, maybe share your screen, Luke, and pull up smartfishingtides.com, and we can look at just kind of a general tide chart. Maybe we'll show one for the Gulf, and then one for the East Coast as well, and see the differences here. So what do we got? Sebastian
Yes.
Inlet?
So this is one over in Sebastian, and so the East Coast tide charts are easier. It's more consistent. There's going to be a high, and then basically every 6 hours they'll go from a high to a low, another 6 hours to another high, and vice versa. It'll keep going. The peaks are relatively the same. We'll kind of scroll day by day. And just so you know, wherever you are, it's not, it's within a minute or two accuracy. If you get into a good bite, if there's like the perfect tide, say at noon someday that you're fishing, the tide is going to be the same tide the next day, all else being equal, about 50 minutes later. So as we scroll day by day by day, the curve, right, those peaks are shifting about 50 minutes.
Why 50?
Because that's the speed of the moon. It's about the moon and the sun moving around the earth. So you don't have to know the details, just know 50 minutes day by day and you're good.
Gravitational pull, baby. Gravitational pull.
Well, it's the speed of the moon relative to the speed of the earth going around, or the earth going around the sun relative to the moon going around the earth.
What about for the people that believe the earth is flat?
You're on your own.
Do we have a tide chart for people that believe the earth is still flat?
I don't think they will believe in tides either, I assume. So the core, so these tide tables, again, as we said before, are totally accurate based on the moon and the sun. Those are the core variables. Those are the most impactful variables. But on some situations where the wind is crazy strong, or even the wind is moderately strong, makes a difference. And that's when we really need to use our brains to actually know how it's going to change. And so here's the Atlantic. We mentioned the Gulf being different. So here is a Gulf. Let me just go get a different one. This tide table is a little bit odd looking. So I'll go one over Boca Grande. And again, this is smart fishing tides. And the cool thing is it has a strike score, so you can get just a quick synopsis on the daily, the daily projection. This day is going to be better than the other. And then further down, it gives the hourly projections. So again, a lot of people don't have all day to fish. I wish I did. I don't either. And so I use this to know, okay, if I only have 3 hours to fish, this day in particular, based on the tides and the weather, like the unique thing about our system is that it incorporates the weather as well. Then I know I need to go in the morning. So day by day, let's look at a day by day chart. So this is Gulf. Again, remember, the Atlantic was very symmetrical. There was a high, there was a low, they were 6 hours apart, and they were the highs were relatively the same and the lows were relatively the same. That's not the case on the Gulf. Gulf has a little bit more complexity because it's basically the Atlantic Ocean is the major contributor, and then it has to wrap around the state of Florida, and it starts having all these weird things. But again, the tide tables are good as long as the wind and the pressure aren't impacting things. And so when they are, just like the Atlantic side, we just need to know how to account for it when making our plans. So you can see, they just change a lot. And again, although it changes, still use the chart and then just know how to make the adjustments from the chart.
So maybe let's give an example, Luke. Let's start with wind. So you got wind, you got pressure systems, you've got, even rain, right? Obviously, a hurricane obviously changes a lot, but even just multiple days of a ton of rain, all of a sudden places like, let's just say Boca Grande, you got the Peace River now pushing tons of water out in Charlotte Harbor, and that changes stuff. So kind of give some examples, maybe starting with the wind on how this would change the tide.
Yeah, wind is the biggest factor that I've seen. Like rain kind of is, but in a big bay, like rain isn't much of a factor unless it's like a hurricane sitting on top of somewhere for a while. But wind, so wind is the number one thing to think about. That is the biggest factor on getting away from the normal curve, because wind is pushing a lot of every wave you see. That is the wind actually pushing the water, in whatever direction the wind is blowing. And so the thing to think about is, we'll just look at the Gulf, for instance, is which way is the wind blowing? So if like we're in Tampa, basically if we get an east wind, we just need to know automatically that the tides are going to be lower than normal, lower than the tide table.
And explain why for the people that don't see that, and because we have people who are also listening via the iTunes, Stitcher, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, the reason why is because that wind is actually pushing the water. It is pushing the water in whichever direction it's blowing. It's wind has friction on the water surface, and as that wind is blowing, that friction on the water surface is literally pushing the water. Obviously, if it's like a 1 or 2 mile an hour wind, it's not pushing very much. You don't really need to think about it. But if we're talking 15 miles or more, even 10 sometimes, but at least 15 and definitely 20 plus, it's a really big factor. And just like an extreme factor. So east wind, we just know, we need to know automatically that it's going to be pushing water out. And so that's going to have the whatever the tide table was. Let's go back to the tide table. Let's say Thursday, the wind's current. Actually, this day it's only going by 6 or 7. So again, another cool thing about these tide tables, you can see the wind right there next to it. Let's see if we can go find a windy day. Man, we have some good weather coming up.
Yeah. The other, I know we're talking about Tampa, but I saw Sebastian had some double digits.
Yeah. So in this case, there's not any extreme wind. That's actually great. We've had a windy summer so far.
Our time is due. Our time is due.
Time is due. So again, just look at the wind. If it's like 15 plus, I mean, just know that it could be like a 6-inch difference on the tides. I mean, it really depends on where you are, but it makes a big factor. And the trouble with it is that there's no like perfect way to know exactly how much it is because every area is different. So that's like the only bad thing is that this isn't precision. It's just a general. And so when I have a wind that's like 15 plus, I just automatically assume that the actual height of the water is going to be like 6 inches to a foot less than what it normally would be.
And then what about the timing of the tide chart? So we know that if you're in Tampa, it's pushing, east is pushing everything out towards the Gulf. So you're going to have lower tides. How does that actually affect the tide chart? Meaning if it said it was going to be high tide at noon on the dot, is it now that impacted as well or not?
No, I mean, so that's the change. The change of wind is what will actually will impact a change of tide time. Like say the wind's just going 20 miles an hour for 5 days in a row. That middle day is the actual change of the water from going low to high is going to be pretty much normal. It's just the level is going to be the whole curve. The whole curve is just pushed down, right? But if you go from no wind at all to 20 mile an hour winds in one day, it's gonna take a while for the wind to blow all the water out of Tampa Bay, for an example. It's gonna take a while for that wind to blow all that out. So the outgoing tides are gonna be really strong, stronger than normal, because again that wind is already pushing all this water out of the Gulf. And now as this water's coming out of the bay, it just has to go that much faster to keep up with the wind that's pushing it, as well as the fact that the Gulf is now a little bit lower than usual. Again, not a huge amount, but it's definitely enough to factor. So when say the wind is going from calm to a strong east, and we're fishing the west coast of Florida, we now know that the outgoing tide is going to be a stronger current, and the incoming tide is going to be a weaker current. So
because it's having a fight against.
Correct, because now the gravitational pull is trying to get the water in, but the wind is pushing it out. And if this was 3 days into a constant wind from the east, then the incoming tide is going to be coming in the normal time. Just everything's going to be lower. But the fact that it went from calm to strong wind, that factor of all that water moving out definitely will make the incoming tide less than it otherwise would be. In some situations, it'll actually be the current will be reversed of what it should be because of the wind. So it's a big factor.
Explain what that means.
meaning that the tide chart is showing an incoming. Like it would obviously, if it was a really strong incoming, it wouldn't be an issue. But like say like right here in this curve, it's showing a strong, it's showing a weak incoming. This is on the Gulf side. This is for those listening, we're on the Gulf Coast tide chart. We have a low tide it's a weak low tide. So it's a high low, I should say, and the low tide is at just under a foot, and then about 5 hours later, we have a high tide that is only like 0.2 feet above it. And if early in the morning there was like no wind and it just started cranking up from the east, this little weak incoming tide might get totally overshadowed by the wind. Again, like I don't know. This isn't precise, but at a minimum it'll get totally weakened, if not potentially overshadowed.
So it almost like, so someone on the water can almost feel like there was just no incoming tide that day.
Right. I mean, it would probably, if it did get overshadowed, it wouldn't be by much, but correct. And as soon as this afternoon outgoing started coming on, assuming the wind was still going, then it's going to be moving. It's going to be really going out because of the wind factor. And then obviously everything flip flops. If it was coming out, if the wind is coming out of the west and it's hitting the Gulf Coast of Florida, then the tides on average will be elevated compared to normal. And if the wind is trending up, trending strong, then that's just going to be pushing more water in. So the incoming currents are going to be stronger than the outgoing currents. And so as far as predicting when the best time to fish will be, the incoming currents will have the advantage, given that it's moving a lot more water, which is moving a lot more bait fish, which is going to get those predators fired up for eating some food. And just to show an example on how impactful this is, and we'll pick the Indian River. I used to fish out of here for a while, and this is where I started kind of learning the ropes with just tides and everything. Because I never really paid attention to the tide tables. Like I was just, oh man, like this tide chart was wrong. Like I just thought, I don't know why the water was so low in the wintertime one day and then it was like normal the next. I was, oh yeah, that one day the tide chart was wrong. The tide chart was right based on the wind and the moon, or the sun and the moon, but it didn't factor in the crazy wind and the high pressure that came in after a wintertime cold front. Like that's why our wintertime, our Gulf side, the wintertime cold fronts, again, we have a high pressure. And so, the other factor is the pressure. High pressure is pushing down on the water. It is literally moving the water down. And so if you have high pressure plus wind that's going offshore, that's a double whammy on making the tides lower than usual. So on this Gulf Coast, we get the crazy winter low tides. That isn't because it's just wintertime. It's because we have high pressure plus an offshore wind is just pulling all that water out, and that's the factor.
Which happened during that one hurricane, right on Bayshore when it went.
Well, that wasn't wintertime, but the Bayshore that was during the summer. That was during the fall when that was Hurricane Irma that came through, and that was the wind. Like wind is the biggest factor. So hurricanes,
wind and pressure, and it was low tide to begin with too.
Well, but hurricanes are different because hurricanes are low pressure systems. So the pressure factor actually was pulling the water up. All else held equal. Yeah. But the wind, it was like 50 plus mile an hour wind, or at least 30 for an elevated time. Because there were a lot of people. I saw some videos of people on Bayshore right here, and the wind was moving offshore, and it was so strong that it blew all the water out. Like literally, this was totally barren sand. And I lived here for 4 years. Never once did I see this stuff dry, like not even close.
Yeah.
And I fished the shoreline a lot. Like there's a pretty good amount of water usually on this section. It was bone dry. And again, the tide chart didn't show that it was going to be dry. It wasn't a factor of it wasn't some crazy anomaly with the moon and the sun orientation relative to the earth. It was it was flat windy and the wind was blowing. It was just pushing all that water out. So it can be obviously a hurricane is that's an oddity. The wind is usually not that strong for a consistent period of time, but it's just an example of the impact of it. And just like Lake Okeechobee, right? Let's just talk about somewhere that doesn't even have any tidal impact. Lake Okeechobee has that huge mound all around it because hurricanes come through. That friction on the water surface is pushing all that water in that massive lake all to one side, and it literally can flood without that.
All right, go back. Sorry, I interrupted him with hurricane talk. Go back. I think you were talking about Indian River and the power of wind.
Right. Yeah. So Indian River, it's unique in the fact that it's just a massive body of water, and it doesn't really have much interaction with the Atlantic Ocean, so that the tides are really weak. And so, but the tides on the ocean side are pretty strong. And so Sebastian Inlet is an area that I fished for a long time. I lived in Palm Bay for like 7 years. And so the tide variation on the Atlantic side, let's see what we have here. So it's about like a 2 foot up and down movement. So, right. So, we're on the tide chart on the Atlantic. The lows are right at 0, plus or minus, and the highs are a little bit above 2. So we're talking, over 2 feet of variation. And now let me show you, just if we go barely inside, we're going to load all the nearby points. And here's Sebastian Inlet. We're just going to go just to the town of Sebastian. So we're just going just across the river. And now we have a 0 to a 0.3, right? So it did go from 0 to 2 feet, and now it's going from 0 to 0.3. So we went from a 2 foot swing to a 0.3 foot swing, and that's because there's just not much interaction with the Atlantic Ocean in this massive river.
And that's why it's so critical to actually pick the tide station closest to you. Because the one is Sebastian Inlet, and one's the city of Sebastian. There's a lot of people that would just grab one real quick saying they can't be that different. That's nuts.
Yeah, so look at the difference. So we're 2.7 miles away, and the tides could not be any more different. And the reason why is because this Atlantic Ocean is moving up and down 2 feet pretty much every day, every 6 hours, up and down 2 feet, up and down 2 feet. But this huge body of water in here, the Indian River, the only interaction it has with the ocean for like 20 miles north and another 20 miles south is this one little inlet. So there's no way that enough water can go through this little tiny cut to make the river go up by 2 feet. If this whole body of land was gone, it would, right here along the shoreline, would go up by 2 feet. But the fact that we don't have that, it's like an hourglass, right? Those little hourglass things, you flip it over and it has the two bigger bodies of sand and that one little funnel that it has to go through. And it takes a while, right? If that funnel wasn't there, you'd flip it over and sand would just fall down immediately. But it has that little funnel, so everything's delayed. And so the tidal delay from the ocean or the Gulf inland is all based on how much constriction there is. So I learned this the hard way. I was out waiting right here. This is when I learned the delay on tides. I was waiting out here, and I had to cross one of these. I think I crossed over this island right here, and there's this little cut. Yeah, Joe, we fished this a long time ago. Remember that? We used to camp out there. And so the current was going out when I started fishing. And so I was confident. It was in the wintertime, and I don't wear those waders. I just wear boots. And it was like it was like knee deep. So I was like perfect, knee deep. The water flow's going out. I'm good, right? Like the water's going out, so that means the level is going down. What I didn't factor in is the craziness of this unique situation where we have all the movement on the ocean and very little movement over here. And so even though the current flow was going out, the actual level was coming up. So when I had to cross back in this cold water, it was no longer knee deep. It was like waist deep. And so now I was cold, and now I'm soaking wet the rest of the day on trying to drive back. So long story short, it's very important to understand how the tidal situations just interact, because in some cases the actual current flow doesn't correspond with the height when you're dealing with unique unique, areas like this, like the Sebastian River or Sebastian Inlet. But back to the wind. So as we saw, there's like a 0.3 tidal movement based on the sun and the moon, right? 0.3
Yep.
up and down.
And that's accurate. I mean, you can predict that for years out, right? I mean, we know what tides are going to be.
Yeah, but when I used to fish this, I would be out. I used to fish all this area, and this is just south of the inlet, and north of there is just a large body of water. It's probably a couple miles wide, and it goes, this is like 20 plus miles north. And I would be out some days, and it would be so much deeper than the day before. And I'll be fishing down here. And I was like, what is going on? Like, it must be like a crazy high tide. Like, what's going on? But it wasn't a tide factor at all. It was just the wind. And what happened is there was a north wind, right? It was a pretty strong north wind. And if you look on this map, right, that north wind is having friction surface on this water, and it's pushing all this water all the way down, and it's building up right here at this funnel point. So all this water is being pushed down, and right here it's getting built up. And this is where I was fishing, and it was like crazy high tide. I was like, what is going on? The water level was high. And again, I thought the tide chart was busted. This tide chart prediction is terrible. But the tide chart was good. I just didn't know how to apply the wind variable into it. I didn't even think to plan for a higher tide than normal. And the opposite is true here as well, right? If the wind is ripping from the south, now this whole area is going to be super shallow. And then the northern section of it, as soon as it starts getting constricted, is going to be the high point. So same with like Mosquito Lagoon. There's really no tidal impact at all. It's all wind driven. And this cut, Holliver Canal, for those who fish it, even though there's relatively no tidal impact from the Atlantic Ocean here, when that wind is switching, the current in this channel can get really strong. So very, very important just to understand that.
I think a really big takeaway for all listeners is wind, the importance of wind. And I know just from watching you over the years, and I learned, through Luke and guys like Tony and Captain Peter Deeks and Cap Mark Johnson, all of our fishing coaches, and now Wyatt, et cetera, and Dylan Hubbard, is how important the wind is, not just for this, but just for predicting where you should be, fishing that day. So not just for the tide, but also to predict the where. And that's a whole nother podcast. We're going to be doing one on the whole 90-10 rule that where wind does apply to that. It helps you predict the spot. But crazy, right? How so few people talk about wind. They're all, they talk about tide, and obviously people know wind's important. Obviously, if you're going out offshore, you're going to be checking the wind, but a lot of inshore anglers don't really check wind enough. And I've seen you kind of almost trumpet where it's like, hey, this is one of the most critical factors that I look at first now.
100%. Yeah, I know the wind projections. I'm upset when the wind projections aren't what they're supposed to be, which happens a lot, but it's never like totally opposite. So yeah, on every trip, I look at the hourly wind projections just to know what's going to happen, because it's a big impact. And just an example too, like I just moved over here to St. Pete in this area, and it's crazy. Just looking at the canal, if there's a wind coming from the south, this canal is at the highest points I've ever seen. It was a couple weeks ago. It was like a 25-mile-an-hour wind from the south, and the water was crazy high, by far the highest I've ever seen. And the actual tide chart, it wasn't like a big high. It wasn't like a new moon or full moon when we have the elevated tides. It was just the elevated wind made a big factor. And what was happening is that wind was just pushing all this water, right? All this water across Tampa Bay. And then it was basically getting compounded in this Boca Ciega Bay. It was just getting pushed in there. And it was just rising more and more than it normally would. And that's really why, as far as the actual damage of hurricanes, most of the damage, the coastal damage, is due to water, and it's because the windy, it's the quadrant of the hurricane that is actually pushing the strong wind up against the shoreline. that's where the damage is. And it's because the wind is just pushing all that water up on the shore. It's hitting the shore, it's compounding, it's basically building, and it will eventually start causing damage when there's enough of it. Obviously, like a 20-mile-an-hour wind won't do that, but when you're talking 40 plus for a extended period, for a long period of time, it's dangerous. And as far as just I'd say the takeaways too, just to know that if you want to know the terms, I'd have those up here. So the spring tide, or the best tides to fish, are called spring tides, and that is when the Earth and the Moon are in linear direction. They could be on either side of the Earth, which is going to be the full moon, and then it could be on the same side of the Earth, which is the new moon. Those are going to be the strongest tides because the gravitational pull of the Earth and the moon are hitting the Earth from the same direction, and that's the best time. In general, that's going to be the best time to fish because there's going to be elevated currents, which is going to move more bait fish, which is going to get the predators fired up. The other tide term to know is the neap tide, and that is the time where the Earth and the moon are at a 90-degree angle relative to the Earth. So basically, the two, the Earth and the moon, the sun and the moon, are basically like offsetting their power, if you will, their gravitational force. So that's when there's going to be the weakest tides of the month, and that's generally going to be the time where the fishing isn't quite as good as the other periods. But again, just like everything, there's always going to be some fish that's willing to eat. So if you have time to go fish, still fish, but just know that those are the two core best times to fish, all else being equal. But even then, even on the neap tide, still worth getting out there and giving it a whirl.
Yep. And do you mind explaining why, if someone is new and doesn't understand why having a higher tide correlation and more current is going to be better?
Yeah, I don't care so much about the height as far as trying to plan the best time to fish. I really don't care about the height nearly as much as I care about the movement, because the movement of water is what is triggering the feeding action. So on the tide-based feeds, it's the movement of water that is the trigger, not so much the height. Like it's very rare that as soon as the tide gets right here, this is where the fish are going to be eating. No, it's when is the current maximized for most areas, because again that's just moving bait fish. And as the current is moving bait fish, a lot of time it'll disorient them. Like those small little bait fish will sometimes get disoriented, or these predators will just sit down in a pothole on a grass flat. They're just sitting down on a pothole or behind a rock in an inlet, and they're just sitting there. They're just out of the current so they can save energy, and they're just sitting there waiting. They're waiting on the current to bring a little bait fish right towards it, and it'll come out and grab it, and then go right back down and just save its energy. Stay out, just out of the current, but close enough to where they can see or feel prey coming over, and that's when it's just easier. So they feed more on the current periods just because it's easy, and they feed the worst when there's no current at all, because now they have to go out and chase prey down. Like now it's not being brought to them; they have to chase it. And why would they do that if they know that I'll just wait another couple hours and the current's going to be moving fast? Like they're just going to save their time, save their energy, and just sit and relax, and then get ready to pounce once that current's moving. And we've seen that too, like fishing. There's dock lights, Joe, at Little Gasparilla. Go out there at night, and if we wouldn't plan it properly, we go out there on the slack tide. There's no current movement, and it's almost impossible to catch them because those snook they're just not feeding. But as soon as wait an hour or two and that water starts moving, and they're fired up. It's not that they weren't there during the slack tide; they're still there, but they're just not feeding, and so they're going to be much less likely to be striking lures or even bait fish for that matter.
Yeah, that moving water is like the dinner bell ringing, baby, and all of a sudden you see a couple of those little shrimp are getting pulled either in or out, and you see little crabs are getting pulled in and out, and bait fish, and it's just like it's crazy. It's just all of a sudden it turns on. Like a light switch. Pretty wild. So the big I don't know if it's $1 million or $1 billion question. Everyone always asks, well, hey, should I fish incoming or outgoing? There used to be, some old sayings that, oh yeah, for inshore fishing, you only want to fish incoming if that's all you could fish. I don't know that that's necessarily true. What are your thoughts?
So yeah, I think that's the word. I think it's a big mistake that many people have, is to focus on one tide, and I can say that from experience because I did that for many years. I would only fish the incoming tide and the top end of the incoming tide because all I knew to do was to go catch live bait, catch white bait, and then go pitch it under mangroves. And that's when it's best to do that type of fishing in many cases, assuming, because right at low tide there's not enough water under most of those mangroves to even fish. And what I've realized once I finally just made myself start fishing whenever I could, and instead of just targeting that one specific tide, is that now some of my best fishing is actually on like the outgoing tide or even low tide situations. And it's almost like fishing a barrel, right? At the lower tides, those fish have less places to hide. And so like now my least favorite time to fish is like those really big high tides, because those fish can just be in so much more area and they're harder to find. In many cases, like fishing mangroves, now I do almost all artificial. So when they get way up in the mangroves, it's just really hard to get to them. If you have live bait, you can chum them out. That's what a lot of people do. That's what I used to do. But now I like to get out there before the high and fish the trees as they're just starting to get up into the trees, or as the water's going down as they're starting to push out of them. So I would say it's a big mistake to focus on one tide versus the other. The best advice I could give is to just focus on current. And an easy way, the bad thing about current is that tide charts don't really show current. It's just the tide height. And the good news, though, is that there's an easy way to derive the current flow based on a tide chart like this. And it's the slope of the line, right? Because just seeing this graph, for those listening, I'll explain it. So we have, this is the Gulf Coast of Florida. So we have in the morning at 7 a.m., we have a 1.2 foot tide. And then about 4 hours later, about 5 hours later, it goes down by like 0.2 feet. And another 5 hours later, it goes up by like 0.3. And then overnight, it drops down considerably. And it's the slope of the line that we need to focus on. So I highly recommend, when you are looking at tides, don't look at the number-based tide graphs where it just shows a bunch of numbers. It's just, for me, I'm a visual learner. So I like to just look at these tide charts, at the graphs, the line graphs, where it goes up and down, and the slope of the line, the steepest part of the slope is when the most current is going to be happening. Again, assuming that there's no crazy wind variable or anything like that. So looking at this at 4 a.m. is going to be the strongest current of the day. And I can know that in 3 seconds, just looking at this graph, because it's easy to see, right? Just look at the slope of the line. The steeper the slope, the more current you have. The flatter the slope, the less current you have. So in the middle of the day, we have a low that is actually kind of high. It's a high low, if you will, right in the middle of the day. And so there's just hardly any water movement. So the middle of the day is really not going to be the best time to fish. If I could, on this day in particular, I would get out there early and take advantage of the strong tide, the strong current, which happens to be incoming. But if I would like it just as good if it was flip-flop, I would take advantage of that strong tide, and knowing that the middle of the day is going to be weak.
Yeah, you could be back by, and look at that, the chart below it says that.
Yeah,
5, 6, 7 a.m. You could be back at home, boat or kayak, all cleaned off by 8 in the morning. Have your coffee, and you've already caught 2 inshore slams. Boom, bam, sham.
So, the ultimate shortcut is just to use smart fishing tides, because we have the predictive analysis down here, which takes the tides table stuff along with the other variables like wind speed, wind direction, pressure changes. It takes all of it into account, and it'll spit out an actual curve to show you when the best, based on the data, the best times to fish will be. And we've been doing this for almost about a year now, I guess. But it's good. I mean, it is again, it's taking the details and putting it in just a nice, easy to read format where you can just look at it and know automatically what to do.
Yep. And so that shows you the time. The other thing that we solve for is where to fish, right? And that's really the most critical thing, because you could be there at the right time, and if you're in a dead zone, you ain't going to catch diddly squat. And that's why we created that Insider Club. Is everything Luke and I wish was around, back when we were struggling and super inconsistent and quite frustrated and focused on all the wrong things, like just, all the shiny object things that are out there that don't necessarily help you catch more fish unless you're at the right spot at the right time. And that's the whole focus. So we do little calls or little, webinars like this every single week. We're actually getting on satellite maps every single week and showing all of our members. We're now over 14,000 members from Texas to Florida, where it started, up to really Virginia, even New Jersey area, and showing you guys where to go out there and catch inshore slams, and doing some nearshore stuff as well. We just got back from the Keys here recently and did a little offshore stuff. So, always doing a little bit more, but the primary focus is the inshore slams, the redfish and speckled trout and snook and flounder and black drum and sheepshead, and obviously, depending on the season, Spanish mackerel. So hope you guys will join us, and that's all at saltstrong.com. And the big news that we've been doing here the last couple of months, which is two reasons why the whole club exploded. We were celebrating 10,000 members, right, Luke, at the beginning of the year, last time we got a haircut, and now we're at 14,000. I mean, it took us 5 years to get from 0 to 10,000, and now, in 5 months, 6 months, we go from 10 to 14. And it was we started offering tackle, and not just tackle, 20% off pretty much all of the best stuff out there. And another thing that separates us from everyone else is we don't have sponsors. And so we personally spend our own money and buy pretty much every reel that's ever been made, all the best, most popular rods, lines, from braid to mono to floor. We test the stuff out and we tell our members, here's what's the best value. And so we don't want to be a Bass Pro that just provide. I think that's one of the biggest disservices to fishermen, is just having this unlimited supply of crap they can buy. I mean, wouldn't you rather go into a store that had the best stuff, that was truly the best value, and you had coaches there that had actually tried it out and can stand by it and show video proof, like, hey, this is why this is the best value. And that's what we do. And you get 20%, all of our members get 20% off everything. So let's just say it was a Daiwa reel, which we're real big fans of, because we've tested, Daiwa and Shimano and Penn, all the other big ones out there, 20% off all of your gear. So that's been big. And number two, now that e-learning is cool, my kids, they're now doing e-learning with their teachers, and that's essentially what we're doing, is just teaching people how to fish online. And you'd be shocked, blown away on how much improvement you can see in a short amount of time from learning this stuff online. Right now, if you guys made it this far in this video, I'm guessing you probably learned something. And this is just one little video. We have, 600 or 700, might even be over 1,000 now. It's crazy how many different videos we have on every topic you can imagine for our Insider members. This stuff that you can't find out there on YouTube. And we try to simplify it. Most of these videos we do for Insider members, 10 minutes or less. We try to do it super quick, cut all the fluff, and just help you save time, and of course help you save money on tackle. Well, you got the map pulled up there, Lukey?
Yeah, and I just wanted to show if you're an inshore angler,
a ton of spots.
Yeah, if you're an
those are all
angler,
fishing reports,
and you like catching redfish, sea trout, flounder, snook, throughout the year, and then the migrational like tarpon, triple tail cobia, this is the place. There's no better resource for you in both the breadth of education and the depth, as well as the community. So this map that you're looking at, this is the community. This is the geographical pins of all the community reports. So now we have over 13,000 members, and many of which are posting their own reports. And since we were talking about Tampa, we'll just zoom in. And there is an absolute ridiculous amount of posts.
So every one of those pins is an actual real-time fishing report from either ourselves or members, showing where they were, what they caught, what lures and or bait they were using. It's that's wild, dude. Tampa is packed. So what filter do you just use?
And so this is just the month of June, and
Okay.
so we can now say, okay, now that there's so many pins, it's impossible to look at all of them. So now it's okay. Let me just see what members have done in June, and these different reports not only show what fish were caught and what lures were used, but more importantly, many of them show details like the tips and tactics. Like, hey, I was fishing the on the edge of the grass slats in 3 to 5 feet of water with the jig, or it was, hey, incoming tide was it, and the fish were up under the mangroves or under the docks, whatever the case was. So just a wealth of knowledge, and we're building some more filters and more analysis tables on this. But more importantly, again, it's just about just a massive community of like-minded anglers who are just willing and eager to share tips.
Cool. Yeah. And I hope if you are a member, I know a lot of our members listen to the podcast. Thank you guys. You are our family. You're the foundation of the whole company, and we can't do it without you. So we really appreciate you. And it's been cool. This is now 5 years, and a big chunk, I think the vast majority of our original members, we started with, 0, it was Luke and I, and we got 100. I remember thinking, oh, we got 100. And most of the same original people 5 years ago are still now members today, which is really, really awesome, and a testament to just how powerful that network is, and really just what a positive, like, just helpful. There's no cursing, there's no belittling, no negativity. So guys, we appreciate all of you for keeping it clean and just having amazing people. And of course, if you're not a member, come join us, saltwater.com. It is the only fishing club that gives you 20% off all the best stuff out there, plus shows you where to fish every week, plus gives you this online community to ask anything that you want. There's never a dumb question. And just truly people that want to help you out and help you save time and money. And man, just that network and the community, it is so powerful. I mean, we learn stuff, right? I mean, we've been able to go catch more fish just based on what someone has shared with us, and even learning little new techniques. I mean, like with Marcos, learning a new way to catch 40-inch snook on a fake shrimp. Who would have thought? And that's all because of the power of that network of people sharing. So
yeah, and this is the only investment in fishing you can make that the owners are so confident that it produces results that actually gives a 365-day 100% satisfaction guarantee.
Oh snap! How can they do that? I'll tell you how. It's as long as we can go legally is 1 year, and so we went the absolute max. Some companies
not legally, but based on our merchant, we can't go longer than a year. So that's what it is. It's a year.
That means legally, but yeah, some companies have 30 days money back guarantee. Some 60. Very few have 90. We went a full 365 days. We're that confident. We want you in there.
Yeah, and again, and this is just the species is really species based. We have a ton of members in Texas. It's like 30% of the total membership is in Texas now, and just really throughout the entire Southeast. So, if you haven't yet tried it, I'd recommend. And it is just a wealth of knowledge. And no matter how advanced you are, we have a lot of full-time guides. It is impossible not to learn as long as you just spend a little bit of time looking through the community posts. It's impossible not to learn some game-changing tips on because again, we have 13,000 members posting their own helpful analysis and tips and tactics, and it has been mind-blowing just how much, for me personally, just how much my game has improved simply by just looking through that community every once in a while and just picking out some cool things and trying them. Because in many cases, some unique stuff that these Texas members are doing are working really well over here, and a lot of the things that us Florida members have been posting, the Texas members are showing that it's working great over there as well. So, no better way to grow than to just increase your network.
Yeah, buddy. All right. This has been a good one. This has been super helpful. I even learned some stuff on this one.
Yep. So tide tables are always good for the main factors, but what they are 100% will not account for is the wind and the pressure, and that's when it's on us to just to know that it's going to be higher or lower or later or earlier, and it's an art, half science, half art. So just be mindful of those impacts to the tide table. And so for whatever area you're fishing, based on the funnels, if you will, the results will impact a little bit, but just be mindful of it. And over time, you'll see that you're going to get more and more accurate on knowing how much and how far the deviations from that tide chart will actually be on the water.
Pay attention to that wind, direction, and speed. Critical. And pick the tide, because I've done that before. You're in a hurry and you just pick one that looks close by, and all of a sudden you're like, man, that was an hour off. It's pretty critical. Cool. That was awesome. Thank you guys again. If you're listening via iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify and you want to go see some of the video footage, we'll have all that. It's saltstrong.com/, that's /podcast. So saltstrong.com/podcast. You can also join the club there as well and start your 365-day, 100% money-back guarantee trial if you're not 100% thrilled. We want everyone walking away saying, man, that was the best investment I ever made in myself when it comes to fishing. So hope to see you in the club. For you current members, we really appreciate you. Hit us up. We're here to serve you and help you. If we can do anything, let us know. Otherwise, we will talk to you on the next podcast.
See ya.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul. It was